Betty White was married 3 times. The first 2 ended in divorce within months. The third one lasted 18 years. And then she spent the next 40 years alone, refusing to marry again. When people asked her why, she always gave the same answer, and every time she said it, tears would fill the eyes of everyone listening. This is the story of a love so powerful it defined Betty White's entire life, even decades after it ended. Let me take you back to 1961. Betty White was 39 years old. She had already been burned by marriage twice. Her first husband, a pilot named Dick Barker, had married her in 1945. That marriage lasted less than 6 months. Her second husband, Lane Allen, had demanded she give up her career. She chose her work. The marriage ended in 1949. By the time the 60s arrived, Betty White had built a wall around her heart. She was successful, she was independent, and she was done with love. Then she walked onto the set of a game show called Password. The host was a man named Allen Ludden. He was 44 years old. He was handsome, he was charming, and he was grieving. His wife, Margaret, had just died of cancer, leaving him alone with 3 children. The same week Betty appeared on his show as a celebrity guest was the week Allen buried his wife. Betty noticed something about Allen that day. He was in pain, but he never showed it on camera. He was kind to everyone, even through his grief. He was, as she would later say, the most genuine man I've ever known. They didn't fall in love that day. Betty went back to her life in Los Angeles. Allen went back to his in New York. But something had shifted. A seed had been planted. The following summer, their agents booked them to star together in a play called Critics' Choice. It was a romantic comedy about a married couple. They would spend 3 weeks living in small cabins by a lake in Maine, performing together every night. Allen brought his 3 children. Betty brought her defenses. By the second week, Allen wasn't saying hello anymore. He was saying something else. "Will you marry me?" Betty laughed it off. It was a joke. It had to be. They barely knew each other. But Allen kept asking. Every day, every night after the show. "Will you marry me?" And every time Betty said no. But here's the thing about Allen Ludden. He didn't give up. When the summer ended, Allen flew to California to see her. He proposed again. She said no. He flew back the next month. Proposed again. She said no. For an entire year, Allen Ludden crossed the country to ask Betty White the same question. And for an entire year, she gave him the same answer. "I was scared to death," Betty admitted years later. "I didn't want to move from California to New York. I'd been burned before, and I thought, what if this doesn't work? What if I lose everything again?" Allen understood her fear, but he refused to accept it. One night at dinner, he pulled out a small box. Inside was a wedding ring, a beautiful gold band with diamonds all around. He slid it across the table. "You might as well take it," he said, "because you're going to put it on one day." Betty stared at the ring. She felt her heart racing, and then she pushed it back. "I am not," she said. "That's it. That does it." Any other man would have given up. Allen Ludden was not any other man. He took the ring, attached it to a gold chain, and hung it around his neck. He wore it every single day. Every time Betty saw him, there it was, that ring dangling against his chest, a constant reminder of his question and her refusal. It got covered in soap when he showered. It got stained with suntan oil when he went to the beach. But he never took it off. He vowed he would only take it off for one reason, Betty remembered, if I said yes. 3 months went by. Allen kept wearing the ring. Betty kept saying no. And then Easter arrived. A package came to Betty's door. Inside was a fluffy white stuffed bunny. On its ears hung tiny gold earrings with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. And tucked inside the bunny's paws was a note. Please say yes. That night, the phone rang. It was Allen. Betty picked up the receiver. She looked at the bunny. She thought about the ring around his neck. She thought about the year she had wasted saying no. And for the first time, she said something different. Okay, yes. Allen laughed. You know what? He said. You're the only woman in the world who said yes to marrying me, not for the earrings, but for the stuffed bunny. Betty laughed too. The only reason I said yes, she joked, was because you have 2 poodle puppies. They were married on June 14th, 1963, at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Betty was 41. Allen was 45. His 3 children stood beside them. So did Betty's parents. It was a small ceremony, intimate and perfect. And then something magical happened. For the next 18 years, Betty White and Allen Ludden lived what she called a honeymoon that never ended. They worked together constantly. Betty appeared on Password whenever she could. The first episode after their wedding became legendary. You can see the way they look at each other, the joy in Betty's eyes when the announcer introduces her as Mrs. Allen Ludden for the first time. They couldn't stop smiling. At home, they had rituals, date nights that weren't really dates. Allen would pick up a chicken on the way home, throw it on the barbecue, and they'd put on a stack of records and dance in the kitchen. We enjoyed each other, Betty said simply, every single day. Their friends noticed it too. Producer Lynn Boland watched them at work and told People magazine, they're like newlyweds. When they can't be together, they call each other from their dressing rooms. Johnny Carson compared their relationship to his own. Carol Burnett called it joyful. There's no other way to describe it. But the honeymoon couldn't last forever. In early 1980, Allen was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He was 62 years old. The doctors gave him chemotherapy, and for a while it seemed like he might beat it. He took a leave from Password Plus expecting to return. He never did. Betty was there through all of it. She would go to rehearsals for the Carol Burnett show, perform brilliantly, and then rush to the hospital to sit by his bed. She had to be suffering something awful, Carol Burnett remembered, because they loved each other so much. But she didn't let it hinder her. She was brilliant as always. On October 7th, 1980, Allen slipped into a coma while on vacation in Monterey. The cancer had spread. The medications had caused complications. He never woke up. Allen Ludden died on June 9th, 1981. He was 63 years old. It was 5 days before their 18th wedding anniversary. Betty was at his bedside when he took his last breath. We missed 18 years by 3 days, she said later, but it was still a honeymoon. After Allen died, something changed in Betty White. Not outwardly. She kept working, kept laughing, kept making the world smile. But inside, she had made a decision. She would never marry again. People didn't understand. Betty was beautiful. Betty was famous. Betty was only 59 years old. Surely there were other men. Surely she would find love again. But Betty knew something they didn't. She had already found it. Once you've had the best, she told Larry King, who needs the rest? That phrase became her answer to every question about romance for the next 40 years. Would she ever date again? When you've had the best, who needs the rest? Would she ever consider remarrying? I had the love of my life. Why would I need another? But it wasn't just words. It was a devotion that went deeper than anyone realized. Betty kept a photograph of Allen on her bedside table. Not just any photograph, the same one she had kept since the early days of their marriage. She looked at it every morning when she woke up. She blew it a kiss. At night, before she went to sleep, she would open her shutters and blow a kiss to the sky. To him up there, she explained. Over the years, the photograph began to fade. 40 years of sunlight, 40 years of being touched, 40 years of kisses. A woman named Helen Stickler, who worked with Betty, noticed the damage and offered to restore it digitally. Betty agreed. It was one of the only times she ever let anyone touch that picture. Betty White kept a photo of her late husband at her bedside and would blow him a kiss every morning. Stickler wrote after Betty's death. Over 40 years the photo faded, and I had the great honor of restoring it for her. If there is an afterlife, I hope she's with her Allen. But there was something else Betty kept, something even more precious, the stuffed bunny. The same fluffy white bunny that Allen had sent her on Easter in 1963, with the note that said, "Please say yes." Betty had kept it for nearly 60 years. She slept with it on her bed every single night. It was her last connection to the moment she had finally opened her heart. It wasn't the earrings that did it, she once said. It was the goddamn bunny. I still have it. As the years passed, Betty's love for Allen only seemed to grow stronger. In a 2011 interview with Katie Couric, she was asked about something that had made the interviewer sad. "I read something," Couric said gently, "that you miss the human contact of Allen and your marriage and your relationship." Betty paused. Her eyes grew soft. "You go out with a couple," she said, "and all of a sudden you'll see one or the other reach over, or, something like that." She rubbed her own shoulder, mimicking the gesture of a partner's touch. "And those are the things I miss. It's just that level of personal affection that has nothing to do with sex. Just the personal contact. That's an empty feeling. 40 years of empty feelings. 40 years of waking up alone in a bed that used to hold two people. 40 years of watching couples touch each other and remembering what that felt like." But Betty never complained. She never felt sorry for herself. She was grateful for the 18 years she had, even though she wished it had been longer. "I came to the point of regretting that year that I wasted saying no," she confessed to Oprah Winfrey in 2015. "I would have given anything to have it back. We missed 18 years by 3 days, but it was still a honeymoon." That was her only regret. Not that she had loved too much. Not that she had never moved on. Just that she had waited 1 year too long to say yes. When Betty White died on December 31st, 2021, she was 99 years old. She had outlived Allen by 40 years. She had become a national treasure, beloved by generations who never knew about the love story that had shaped her entire life. But in her final moments, the world learned something that made everyone cry. Betty's assistant was with her when she passed, and according to friends who spoke to Carol Burnett, Betty's very last word, the final sound that escaped her lips before she left this world, was a name. Allen. The man she had loved for 60 years, the man whose ring she had once refused, the man whose photograph she had kissed every morning for 4 decades, the man she had been waiting to see again since 1981. Allen, her agent, Jeff Whitjess, confirmed what everyone suspected. "I don't think Betty ever feared passing," he said, "because she always wanted to be with her most beloved husband, Allen Ludden. She believed she would be with him again. 40 years of waiting, 40 years of an empty space in the bed, 40 years of blowing kisses to a photograph and to the sky. And then, finally, she went home to him. Their stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame sit side by side. Allen's is on the north side of the 600-700 block of Hollywood Boulevard. Betty's is right next to it. Even in death, even in legacy, they are together. Betty White was asked once what choice she would make again if she could live her life over. "Marry Allen Ludden," she said instantly. "No two ways about that. He was something special." She was asked why she'd never married again. "When you've had the best," she said, "who needs the rest?" And she was asked if she ever got over losing him. "Never," she said. Her voice was quiet but certain. "I never will." Some people spend their whole lives looking for love. Betty White found it at 39, almost lost it by saying no, and then held on to it for the rest of her days. She proved that real love doesn't end when someone dies. It doesn't fade like a photograph. It doesn't disappear like a memory. Real love waits. Real love endures. Real love is calling out someone's name as you take your last breath 60 years after you first heard their voice. Betty White lived 99 years. She made millions laugh. She changed television. She became an icon. But the thing she was most proud of, the thing that defined her more than any role or any award? 18 years with Allen Ludden and 40 years of never forgetting him. That's a love story.